It's my privilege today to have with us Dr. Bill Warner of the Center for the Study of Political Islam and the Center for the Study of Political Islam International. He's the author of many books, all of which can be found at politicalislam.com. His pamphlets, his writings, his numerous articles are available everywhere on social media. We will provide the links to his Facebook and his preferred social media, such as Twitter, at the bottom of this video when it's posted. So please look for his material, engage it. It's well referenced. He always provides footnotes and endnotes for everything he says. And it is an astonishing amount of information that you can glean from his many videos also on YouTube. We'll share his YouTube channel so you can find his work directly. Dr. Bill Warner, thank you for being with us today to discuss your book, Measuring Muhammad. And it's particularly, it's relevant that we're meeting here in the run-up to September the 11th. It's been 20 years. In your preface to the book, to the reader, you say, after the attack on the World Trade Towers on September 11th, 2001, I realized that I lived in a world where almost no one knew the doctrine of Islam. Can you share a little bit of your reflection on September the 11th in terms of how much we've been through these 20 years?
Well, we've been through a lot. At first, after 9/11, I was very hopeful that the United States would like to awaken itself as to what Islam really was and what Muslims actually do. But I would have to say now that 20 years later, we're in a much worse position about Islam than we were when we started. Now, we have a lot more people who know something about Islam at the grassroots level. Don't get me wrong there. But at the official level, let me make one distinction here. When 9/11 happened, the FBI didn't know anything at all about Islam. But after that, they actually began to learn something about Islam until something happened, which was the worst event in our whole battle with Islam. We begin to have political correctness take over and a sensitivity to not offending Muslims. And as a consequence, the FBI became less and less knowledgeable about Islam to the point where, under the insistence of the Muslim Brotherhood, they actually purged all their training files. I happen to know this because I'd written several of these papers, and mine was the last paper purged. The man said, look, we're purging this. All it is a collection of statistics and word counts. They said, it is offensive to Islam and it must go. So as a consequence, today, a friend of mine who's an FBI agent, retired, has said he's talked with FBI agents who are young and in the force now and asked them what they know about Islam, and they say nothing. He said, would you like to know about the doctrine of jihad? They says, no, we do not want to know anything about Islam, because if we mention anything about Islam, it could ruin our career. So now that we've gone from ignorance to having some knowledge, back now to not only just ignorance, but an ignorance that cannot be healed as long as those orders are in place. Because what agent is going to want to do something that would tear up his career because he's now a bigot and a hater? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in 20 years later, we're in worse position than we were when we started out. Before we were ignorant, but we could learn. Now we're ignorant and we are forbidden to learn. Wes, you know more about Islam than any police chief in this United States.
I'm afraid so. We keep trying to reach out to the police chiefs and the sheriffs, but that's not really, we try to share, but it's not really something they want to hear or know about. And since our friend, or my friend, I don't think you knew him, Phil Haney, he's gone now.
Yes, I did know him.
Okay, you did know him. We should discuss that further at some point. That's a good connection to have, but an example may have been made, and we still don't know to this day, and there's still people calling and asking. We still don't know what happened to him at that roadside rest in California. And well, let's not go off the rails in that direction, but you're right. I mean, we didn't know anything before September the 11th, but we could learn, we could study. It wasn't forbidden knowledge. Now, after September the 11th, we're not allowed to learn, which I think segues right into a point that we had wanted to discuss today, which is the word kafir or kufar or kufr. And that relates to, we are not allowed to criticize or analyze or have any kind of discourse on Islam. Isn't that the the role of the kafir. You simply submit, and you're not allowed to present.
Actually, the Treaty of Umar, which is one of the first instruments of dhimitude, and a dhimmi, D-H-I-M-M-I, is a non-Muslim who submits to Islam and does whatever Muslims want him to do. So we have the dhimmi is now what we have. That is, people don't want to know because, anyway, in the Treaty of Umar, it was forbidden for non-Muslims, for Christians to read the Quran, which sounds bizarre, but it was one of the deals. And so now then we go, Wes, how many churches do you know where the minister knows something about Islam?
Very few, but they celebrate it. They celebrate Ramadan. They allow them to sing their Quran, recite it in the churches, and they have no idea they're being cursed. The people of the book and those who went astray is part of the utterance of the actual recitation of the Islam every time. It's in their prayers. Pardon me.
Can I make a nonverbal comment about this, about what churches who bring in for the family of Abraham? These people really are profoundly ignorant. You know, there are times in which ignorance is culpable. It's funny, but in the United States, if you're CEO of a company and there's bad things going on in the bookkeeping, that is, cheating is being done, fraud is being carried out, even if you know nothing about it, you're held responsible because you should have known something about it. And we live in a world today in which businessmen are judged to a higher standard than ministers are. Do you follow me?
Oh, I definitely follow you. It's just the height of irony that third wave feminist intersectionality type pastors who worship trees and embrace butterflies. Seriously, that's no hyperbole. These no-mind namaste type Methodist and Lutheran pastors are really unaware that they're welcoming a truly anti-woman ideology into their flock. And I did contact one of our elected officials, a representative, who voted against the anti-female genital mutilation bill, a Democrat from Minnesota, a female, and she voted against a bill that would have outlawed female genital mutilation in Minnesota. And the only 4 people who voted against that bill were Democrats. It's inexplicable. 3 of those 4 are women. One of them said it's a cultural matter. I'm glad my parents didn't spank me like that, you know, in a parking lot. I would have been taken away from my parents if I had ever had my little finger cut off. Right. But this is what we're told to accept now in the name of political correctness, as you were mentioning before.
It's not only we have something which I call the pillars and shields of society. That is, they support society and they protect society. Law enforcement doesn't know anything about Islam because their bosses don't want them to. Feminists won't talk about the abuse of women in Islam. Preachers won't talk about the abuse of Christians in Islam. And by the way, they're given direct orders, as I read the scriptures, to take care of those who are persecuted. But that doesn't seem to work anymore. The universities don't allow debate anymore. Instead, it's now become a process of ideology. Our society is falling around amongst us because the pillars and shields that we have are not doing their job. And by the way, the military, they know as little as anybody else. The only people I've ever met in the military who know anything about Islam are those who were gunny sergeants or something in Afghanistan. But within all organizations, the higher you go, the less they know.
It's those gunny sergeants who had to listen to the screams in the tents and were told to ignore them. By the way, there is some good news on this front, though, in terms of the pillars of society in Minnesota. I'm happy to report the good news, Dr. Warner, that Minnesota finally, in this past legislative season, which has just ended and about to begin again, because Governor Walz is going to have another emergency session during this lockdown, you'll be happy to know that Minnesota finally has a law against child marriage. So I wonder why we needed that this year.
Gosh, I couldn't imagine. Could it be that Mom had married Aisha when she was 6, consummated the marriage when she was 9? He's the perfect Muslim. There's 89 verses in the Quran which state that every Muslim is to do what Muhammad did. So I would call marriage at 6 child marriage. Now, I don't know if you do or not.
Yeah, that seems like child marriage. You know, it seems to be pushing it. Feminists, again, are strangely silent.
Yep.
I don't know what they're, I guess that's a matter for Sigmund Freud. Uh, I would wonder if I could ask you about the size, the trilogy texts,
Right.
getting to the book on measuring Muhammad. You mentioned earlier, your book was banned. It was the law enforcement didn't want to have it in their records. You're measuring the number of times that the Hadith mentions certain words. Can you talk about the size of the Hadith versus the Quran? Because the Quran is minuscule in comparison to the Hadith and the Sirah. And what's the significance of the relationship between those three?
Well, first off, if someone decides they want to learn about Islam, what they'll try to do is pick up the Quran. Let me say this. No human being can understand the Quran until they know who Muhammad is. They know what his life is. That's not a bold statement. All Islamic scholars agree that the interpretation of the Quran involves knowing what Muhammad was doing at the time that the verse was uttered. So we have that. So if you want to learn the Quran, the first step is to know Muhammad, the Sirah, the life of Muhammad. Now, this is good news because it turns out his life story is very exciting. There's spies, counter spies, torturing, secret raids,
Murder.
plot schemes, murder, enslavement. It is truly a gripping story that should be put down on film. But what you find is that all his official biography is known as the Sirah, S-I-R-A, and we have it's been translated in English. It's an 800-page book in fine print. What I have done is to take that book and reproduce it in a much smaller form. I've summarized it and made it easier to understand. So if you want to know what the Quran says, first know what Muhammad said and did. Only then can you do that. Now, oddly enough, the Quran does not contain enough information for anybody to be a Muslim. Not even the Shahada, there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, is found in the Quran. Where you find Islam is in the Hadith, his traditions. And there are several groups of these collections of Hadith, which are what Muhammad said and did. And they're very amusing, some of them. They're very interesting. So what I've done is I've taken 6,000 of the Hadith, which is what the whole collection is, well, more near close to 7,000, and simplify them for the non-Muslim. Because I teach Islam from the standpoint of the non-Muslim, the kafir. I'm not interested in what Muslims think and do to go to heaven and avoid hell. I wish them the best in all their endeavors, but I don't care about it. Instead, what I care about is the part of Islam that impacts us, the kafir. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things in my works that I do. I don't call us unbelievers, non-believers, but because what the Quran calls us is kafir. As a matter of fact, I'm going to sidebar here and go say that one of the things I've always wanted to do, I just finished doing, which was I got a Quran that was a transliteration Quran. That is, you had it in Arabic, you had it in phonetic spelling, and then you had it in regular English. This allowed me to go through and count the number of times that kafir is used in the Quran, because I can now use an English keyboard. 345 verses say by Allah that I am a kafir and Wes, you're a kafir. It's 39 times it says that we're just not non-believers, but ingrates. We're ungrateful. So we now can prove that Allah's term for me and you is kafir. And the plural of kafir is kufar, but I say the plural of kafir is kafirs, period, because I want to make the word usable by anybody. And if you have to memorize another group name like kufar, which is the Arabic plural, for instance, I say hadiths, I don't say ahadith, which is the Arabic plural. I want the word kafir to be used by everybody because it changes your relationship. If you're talking to a Muslim, here's an actual story. A man had a Muslim come to his church in order to teach about the family of Abraham. And everybody was liking the way he was. He was sweet, he was nice. And so the man said, so is it true that I'm a kafir under Islam? The man looked at him and said a word or two and then proceeded to leave the building. Muslims do not want us to use the word kafir. It's the word they use. Usually they say kafir hajjus, which is filthy kafir. Why do they say that? Because Allah says the kafir is unclean. Kafir is lower than any animal. So if you're dealing with some Muslim and he's making nice to you, if you remember in his mind you're a kafir, then all of a sudden his niceness doesn't have any real meaning. Because the kafir can be raped, enslaved, tricked, cursed, tortured. It goes on, it's schemed about. So anyway, so the kafir is the worst creature in the world. And I'm a kafir, and I'm proud to say that. And I want every Muslim I deal with to know that in your eyes, I am a kafir, a filthy kafir. Changes your relationship with everybody.
Absolutely. I forgot to wear my kafir hat for purposes of this discussion today. I have a really wonderful kafir hat. It leads to many conversations with Muslims in public. It's an opportunity to speak.
What do they say?
Well, I was having my hair cut in a salon a few years back, and one of the stylists who had scissors in her hand started staring at me. She noticed my hat sitting there next to the chair, and she wanted to talk about it. So she came across the room and asked me if I knew what that word meant. And I said, yes, I do know what kafir means. It was in Arabic with the ka,
right.
Alif, f, and it was perfect. So with the ra at the end. So she could see kafir, right, from across the room, and in Arabic. And she came over and I said, yeah, I know, it means I'm lower than a pig or a dog. I'm a filthy animal. I'm a kafir. And she sort of became angry, but then the tears flowed. And she admitted to me that she hadn't, she asked me if I knew what it meant in Arabic. And so I started speaking to her in Arabic. That's when the tears really started flowing, because she had come to the United States as a baby, escaped her situation, hadn't seen her father and her brothers in years, and she couldn't speak Arabic. So here she had come over to kind of start to try to defend, to kind of get to bother me about the hat. And she ended up realizing that I knew way more about the word kafir than she even wanted me to know. But it really softened her heart, and I ended up inviting her to church. And, it's on her, but I haven't seen her since. I wish I could know what became of her. She's a nice person, really. Because when tears flow and someone's heart is softened, I think there's a breakthrough there. I mean, all I do is have patience for someone in that condition. By the way, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that she was wearing extremely revealing clothing. So I took that as an opportunity to say, you can dress like this in the United States of America because this is a Judeo-Christian nation, and Jesus treated women, even prostitutes, with the utmost respect. The woman at the well story shows you Jesus 2,000 years ago. The parable, the story of the woman at the well, teaches us that even a stranger, a woman you don't know, from a different ethnic group who speaks a different language, you treat her with respect. You don't do what the life of Muhammad, as we were discussing earlier. She's fair game. You can do as you wish with the kafir. In fact, the Jewish and Christian women who welcome Islam in Minnesota don't understand that under the Quran and the Hadith and the Sirah, they're going to spend the rest of eternity as sex slaves in Muhammad's heaven, in Allah's paradise, right? But I've gone on too much here. But, when she realized that, yeah, she was wearing some clothes that there's a certain part of a camel that comes to mind, but I'm not going to mention it. That's how revealing. Yeah, you'll work it out, but can't say it, or the video might be banned. But she was leaving nothing to the imagination, shall we say? But that's America. That's the United States. That's the message. We have a different operating software than. And there's a different set of rules for the kafir. We really wanted to talk about this word kafir. It's very important. This was a topic that a kafir, from your book now, a kafir can be beheaded, Quran 47:4. A kafir can be plotted against, Quran 86:15. A kafir can be terrorized, Quran 8:12. A kafir can be made war on and humiliated. A Muslim is not a friend of a kafir. See, we get in trouble when we quote the actual Quran, don't we? Because then we're hate speakers. But it's their text. We're just analyzing, doing textual analysis, right?
Well, they always want to make excuses like, well, do you know what the translation is, and things like this. I find that most Muslims know very little about Islam. Now, I'm not talking about some Muslim Brotherhood trained person. The average everyday Muslim doesn't know much about Islam at all. They don't read the Quran. And first off, the Arabic that the Quran is written in is not the everyday Arabic of the common person. And the other thing is, the majority of Muslims do not speak Arabic at all. It's a minority language. Now, of course, we do know that Allah speaks Arabic, and that in heaven, Arabic will be the only language that we hear. But aside from that, nope. I find that Muslims do not know much about what they're talking about because their religion does not encourage them to do this. They're encouraged to just do what the Imam says. As long as Islam is orthopraxic. That is, Muslims of all different faiths do the same prayers. So anyway, most Muslims don't know much about what they're talking about, and it will not be corrected by the Imam. The Imam will give them the lesson they need when they need it.
So the Fusha Arabic utilized in the Quran is really completely different. It's a dead language, and unlike any living language today. And there's numerous translations of the Quran, but people don't know what it says in the original Arabic. So it's sweetened in the English editions that we have now. It's really sweetened quite a lot.
When I started reading Islam, I read 10 different Qurans, and I found that the only real difference was how it translated brutality. If, for instance, if you go to Quran verse 4, 34, or 24, I forget which it is, when Allah says you can beat your wife, if it says you can beat her lightly, you know you're dealing with a corrupt translation, because the translation of the Arabic is you can beat her, period. So it's only on the jihad stuff and other things like that. But then we get people like Zuhdi Jasser. That's the part of the Islam he doesn't want to talk about, the jihad doctrine. So therefore, moderate Islam is simply ignoring part of Islam. Moderate Islam is the buffet approach to Islam, in which you only take the good things from the table, the dessert. You don't eat the spicy food. But the real Quran contains ease and religion, and it also contains great violence. Now, which one is the real Quran? Well, it all depends on what time you're talking about, and it also depends on what you want to do with it. So you've got a sweet verse if you want to use it, or you've got a terrible verse if you want to use that. It's like hot water and cold water. You can turn which one on you need. But we need to understand that we must understand the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith, not the Quran. We must command Muhammad and Allah, not just Allah, because it is Muhammad that leads to the greatest guidance. Most Muslims' lives are governed much more by the Hadith than they are the Quran. By the way, here's an odd example. You'd figure if the Hadith contradicted the Quran, that the Quran would be right. Well, take, for example, the Quran says that a Muslim is to pray 3 times a day, but they pray 5 times a day because that's what the Hadith says. So Muhammad is more influential in a person's life than is Allah.
Tremendous. And that there is a caveat, isn't there, about beating your wife? If you beat your wife, you're supposed to avoid her face.
This is true. But I know of a woman who was with our American forces at a high pass in Afghanistan going to Pakistan. And it was the Khyber Pass, actually, where men have been coming and going for millennia. And they had a separate tent because they were photographing everybody across it. 9 out of 10 of the women who went to the special tent so they could be with a female officer to get their picture taken had their faces bruised. So therefore, I would say it's honored more in the breach than not beating your wife. And by the way, a man's not supposed to strike another man in the face, but you can cut his head off. Now, I tell you what, Wes, if you've got a choice between hitting me in the face or cutting my head off, I'll take hitting me in the face.
Yeah, if you get a choice. Right.
If I get a choice, hit me in the face. Do not cut my head off. I don't want to do that.
I just hope they use a really sharp sword when they come for me. I just be merciful, make it quick, That's like they do the guys on the beach and in the cage,
right. As in Lady Macbeth said, if it be done, let it be done quickly.
Yeah, right. It's too merciful, though. Islam. You mentioned the rules of the Hadith. Those little rules that Muhammad had for cleaning your teeth with a stick, or wiping your bottom with odd number of pebbles. Right.
That's the funniest one to me.
3 or 5 or 7.
And which foot you enter the restroom on?
Is it the right foot?
Enter the bathroom.
Yeah.
I mean, Islam is totalitarian, and by that I mean it covers every single aspect of your life. Islam is not a religion. It includes a religion, but it's also a political system, it's a culture, it's a civilization, it's a legal system. So it is everything. Islam is a complete civilization.
It's funny how you were talking about the different translations of different words in Islam, and we talked about the real meaning of the kafir. And I wanted to say, isn't it so that we often are told that the meaning of the word Islam in itself means peace? It's the religion of peace, but it actually is submission. And you just talked about every aspect of your life being governed. The religion, the name of it is submission. Isn't it more accurate, modern? Or
Well,
would you
this
have
is true. And what does Muslim mean? Muslim means one who submits. So it's all about submission.
one who submits? It's interesting. They want us in English to use the word Muslim. I sort of prefer Islamist, or I even prefer the old word Muhammadan. And they don't like Muhammadan at all. Said did a lot of work on how that was a colonial. Well, they are followers of Muhammad in terms of the what's the path, the way of the Sunni. I'm sorry, the word escapes me right now. But the act of following the life of Muhammad is more important than, as we said before, the Quran. So they're followers of Muhammad, really.
Well, there are 89 verses which say that every Muslim is to pattern their life after Muhammad, and that's the reason we can call them Mohammedans. They're supposed to, it's not that they're to pray. They're to pray exactly like Muhammad did. It's not that they're to fast. They're to fast exactly like Muhammad did. A Muslim is to do everything in their life. The religious observations are all to imitate Muhammad. So therefore, it's perfectly logical to call them Mohammedans. And it's not an insult, nor does it mean, it's simply not an insult to call them Mohammedan. No. Why would that be?
It shouldn't be. They shouldn't think of it as an insult. Could it be back to that dualism where they don't want us to know about the life of Muhammad and the things he actually did?
I'm shocked when you say that, Wes.
Your dry sense of humor, I'm starting to pick up on it. I want to ask you about political Islam, because that's really the crux of it. I mean, that's the majority, this whole belief system, this ideology. Why don't most Westerners today really know anything about Islam's political history, the doctrine, or its ethics?
Well, let's deal with first off. Ask your question again, Wes.
Why don't Westerners today know anything about Islam's political history, doctrine?
Well, they're lied to by the media and told it's a religion. And by the way, those who tell that lie probably believe it. But what we're interested in, here's what I'm interested in about Islam. I'm interested in the part of Islam that affects me, Wes, that affects you. I'm interested in the part of Islam that affects those who don't believe Muhammad. So therefore, that's what I'm interested in. And I define, listen carefully, I define that part of the Islamic doctrine which deals with the non-believer, political Islam. Why? Because it is definitely not religious Islam. I'm not going to Islamic heaven, and I'm not afraid of Islamic hell. So therefore, it's the part of Islam that deals with us and impacts us. And I define that to be political Islam because it's not religious Islam. And it's interesting enough, if you count up all the words in the Quran, the Surah, and the Hadith, there are more words devoted to political Islam than they are to religious Islam. Odd, isn't it?
Very odd.
And then, of course, there's the whole military history. One of the things that is odd is I'm the first person to ask this question. How many people have died in jihad over 1,400 years? I call this the tears of jihad. And it's 80 million Hindus, 60 million Christians, 10 million Muslims, and 120 million Africans. Now, you would think 270 million dead would cause somebody to go, well, how did that happen, Bill? Nope, don't want to know, don't want to hear, don't want to see, don't want to, just please go away, man. Leave me alone. I don't want to be a bigot and a hater by knowing something about the truth. Do you realize that's where we are now?
Uh-huh.
Something about the truth, you're now a racist, bigger, hater, Islamophobe.
Does that touch on the dualistic logic as well? What does the logic of Islam?
Yeah. Well, first off, Islam has two sets of rules. And Islam preaches about Tawhid, one, but it practices two, dualism. That is, there's two Muhammads. There's the Muhammad that preached the religion of Islam for 13 years in Mecca and converted 150 people, but there was no jihad. Then there was Muhammad of Medina, in which he was a jihadist and a politician, but when he died, every Arab was a Muslim. So therefore, there's two Muhammads. There's two Qurans, the early Quran, which has no jihad in it, the latter Quran, Medina, which has 24% of it devoted to jihad. Islam practices two. It divides the world into the believer and the non-believer, and there's different ethics. A Muslim businessman is not supposed to cheat another Muslim. Whoa, 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 what do you mean? What about me? Well, it doesn't say, does it? It just says he's not supposed to cheat another Muslim. A Muslim does not touch another Muslim's wife. What about my wife? It doesn't say, does it? And therefore, that Islam has a dualistic ethical system where it has one set of rules for the believer and another set of rules for the unbeliever. And this is its greatest strength because it always has the sweet, loving face down at the church and at the public gatherings. And then we find out what the real Islam is when they need to practice the use of force.
You know, you remind me of a story. A friend of mine who's a profound Christian. I don't claim to be such a fantastic Christian, but he has 12 kids. Sorry, one. So he was traveling on a family vacation. They were out east, and a Muslim man approached him asking if his daughters were available for marriage.
And it could have been a business deal struck there. Marriage is a legal contract in Islam. It is not an affair of, I really love you. That's not the business at all. It is a business contract. Money's exchanged. It's a very different way of doing business. So he was right to approach him. It's like he was driving a car. Hey, I've always wanted one of those Corvettes. What would you sell that to me for? Get him in a question.
Yeah, he was truly astonished. And what all that Muslim succeeded in doing was red pilling on the spot 14 people. That Muslim woke up 14 people on the spot, and those 14 people have reached hundreds more with this story now back in Minnesota. And so we got to thank the Muslim for his moment of honesty.
No, I mean, he was being very honest. And he was not considered, he wasn't trying to be offensive or shocking or, like I say, it's like, I used to drive a car that was a collector's car. And when I was filling it up with gas, I would have people ask me, what would you take for that, buddy? Well, that's the same thing. And by the way, I taught for 8 years. I had a picture of my daughter on my desk. And one of the Muslim students says, oh, is that your wife? I was like, what?
Do you know that the dualism of Islam goes so far into our world now, it touches our world so far as if you or I were to approach another man and ask if his daughters were available for marriage, the police would be summoned post haste. That would be a matter for filling out a form with the FBI. But that's the dualism. You don't want to offend. So there's a different set of rules. But, you know, I'm glad I'm not in the market. So is there any such thing as non-political Islam then? I mean, is there
there's religious Islam, the 5 pillars, the Shahada, fasting, the Zakat, taking the Hajj, and I missed a 5th one somehow or another in there. Oh, praying 5 times a day. So it's all there.
So
that's the part that's the religious part of Islam. Look, Wes, I do not care how you pray or whether you pray or not. That's not my business. That's your business.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's none of my business. I only care insofar as it touches my life. And like you're talking about business matters, I don't understand why we have Sharia compliant loan instruments in Minnesota. Minnesota pioneered creating a second economic tier for Islamists so they can purchase real estate with interest-free loans. Our banks and real estate companies in Minnesota have special offices set up for a different playing field entirely. But we could go off the rails in that direction. But have our intellectuals in America, how have our intellectuals responded to Islam, if at all, do you think?
Well, it depends on which intellectuals you're talking about. There's brave intellectuals such as Dan Gibson, Robert Spencer, but then there's the other intellectuals. The universities are supposed to be doing systemic reasoning, rational thought. Our university should be where the great debates are being held. That is, if our society were running right, that's where that would happen. But no, I gave a talk at Vanderbilt University, which is here in Nashville, Tennessee, some years ago. And the title of the talk was A Statistical Approach to Islamic Fundamental Text. Sounds very academic, right? And I talked about all my charts and graphs, you know, the ones, the growth of Islam. You've seen them in my books.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I got through, a man stood up in the back of the room and started screaming at the top of his lungs and thrusting his finger and said, "You're a racist, you're a hater, you're a bigot." He didn't call me an Islamophobe because the word wasn't around then. That man was the head of the Middle East department.
Oh.
Notice what he said. He didn't say, when you said this about Islam or you said this about the Quran, you were wrong. He didn't address any of the facts of my lecture, not one fact. Instead, I was the racist and the hater. That was all that he did.
You know, Dr. Werner, you're taking me back to some trainings that I was aware of in Mediterranean, Middle East, Africa region, when U.S. government employees were being dispatched to those areas. The women were given special briefings, special and unique briefings about the situation and how to avoid trouble. And I wish that we had some of those type of feminists around today speaking out about political Islam today, but there's a stunning silence, because I thought that some of the things they were saying back in the day, say 1989, 1991, I thought that some of those things may have gone a little bit over the top. But come to think of it, when you look at some of the trouble that European girls and American girls get into in Africa, they end up hitchhiking in Morocco and they end up dead in a ditch with their heads.
Bad idea.
Very bad idea. The liberalism is truly life-altering and dangerous, to have the view that all cultures are equal and all value systems are the same and you can't judge. We have covered a lot of territory, and I wanted to ask you about punctuation in Islam. In terms of the logic of Islam, do you think it's odd that there's 0 periods, commas, question marks, quotation marks in traditional Arabic? It is an oral language, but it was just made for recitation. But Islam is crippled by the fact that its fundamental text has no start and end. I mean, there's no punctuation in Arabic. What do you make of that in terms of logic?
What it means is that the meaning of the original Quran, if we even have such a thing or that it even exists, will not be, there will be always disagreements about it. There's another thing also, not only is it missing the vowel marks, but it's also, we have copy errors. Any manuscript, no matter what that manuscript is, Gospels or anything else, if it's copied and copied and copied, it's going to have errors that crop up in it, simply because we're human beings and we don't transmit anything perfectly. So it's a matter of there are actually, I've seen where there's many as some number of over 1,000 different Qurans in terms of how the original wordage is translated. So what Muslims like to tell us is, oh, the Christians and the Jews, their texts are fluid and they're changeable. But our Quran there's only been one Quran, Muhammad's Quran, and everything about it is exactly, perfectly true. There's not a single error, and every Quran is exactly the same. There's been 2 times in which all the Qurans were destroyed and a new edition put out, and that was under Uthman, because there were variations. And then that happened also in Cairo in the 1920s, in which there were too many variations, and so the University of Al-Azhar came together and created a second official Quran that had no changes in it. But of course, they had to go through all the other changes and come up with what was the no change Quran that we're using today.
Isn't that tremendous? Because you're bringing to mind an argument that I used to hear American converts to Islam having constantly. So American converts to Islam, largely from the prisons, or there's converts to Islam who are going abroad, right? And they're having this argument about what did Muhammad say versus what did one of his followers say he said. So if there's a complete lack of punctuation, like quotation marks, you can't easily distinguish between what Muhammad said you should do versus what Aisha said Muhammad had said versus what Abu Bakr said Aisha said Muhammad said. There's no accuracy in research for their own historical texts. That's odd.
And yet they like to call it the science of the hadith, which is a joke.
Yeah. Well, corrupting words is something that they're quite accustomed to. And we choose our words in the English language, and we can make up our own adjectives. I wanted to close with asking you an interesting question that came to mind to me kind of repeatedly. I've asked myself this. Would you studied physics, and you taught physics. You might be interested in time travel as a theoretical experiment, for instance. If you could go back in time or push a button or reattach yourself to that matrix world, if you could forget everything you know about Islam and go back and lead a simple life, would you choose to take that pill and dumb yourself down?
No. I think that ignorance is a sin. And we can't know everything about everything, but I think that we do. Look, just as a human being, shouldn't there be one part of your life that you have in order and you can think through, do so clearly? Well, that's what I like. That's what I'm trying to teach everybody about Islam. You can understand Islam. It's not a big deal. It's been made simple to do. And so don't think about reading the Quran. Instead, think about, I want to study Islam and start off with Muhammad, then the Hadith, and then finally, the third time around, read the Quran. Then you will be an expert on Islam because you will know what Muhammad said and what Allah said. Those are the only two experts I refer to. I don't refer to any of the experts on CARE or any other such system. I don't care what Al-Azhar University says. I just care what Muhammad said and did and what Allah said. That's all I go. So I say my teachers are Dr. Muhammad and Professor Allah.
You're going back to the original source material, which is what every scholar should do. It's been done with Christian deconstruction in the universities. Why can't we do that with Islam, right? Accurate scientific research.
Duh.
And it's a good place to leave it, right? Because the foundation of all knowledge is, duh, we start with knowing nothing, no assumptions, right, and we build. And I think you're bringing out a kind of Socratic approach toward learning, and that you're saying the unexamined life is not worth living. And maybe
I agree.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And maybe that's the existential threat that the entire West is under right now, is that we don't have we're not examining our own structures. But we're getting into the realm of philosophy that might be highly technical. But I've really enjoyed this conversation today, Dr. Werner. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, you're quite welcome.